Hi, and welcome to the Simple Worship Conversation, the morning program.
Yes.
With Shannon Moore.
Hello.
I'm Shannon Moore. Who are you?
I'm Reverend Jamie Plunkett.
And I'm glad that you're here.
Me too.
Good to have you back on the show. We've been looking at the show, the program.
The program.
Wonder what that means subliminally. Anyway, we won't get off on all that. We've been looking at the Old Testament in Simple Worship this fall, and we've just looking at it in broad strokes.
Okay.
And so we're jumping now today to Jonah.
Perfect.
Which is one of my favorite Bible stories, though I feel like I say that a lot.
There are some really good Bible stories.
There are.
It's okay to have multiple favorites.
I think so. This one, it's only 4 chapters. You know, I've been in two services, a funeral and an ordination service where we read the whole thing, where I participated in reading the whole thing. So it's hard for me to just read one section. So I'll recap a little bit.
Okay.
But I'm only going to read chapter 3.
Okay.
And then we'll kind of talk about it for a few minutes, 10 minutes
Perfect.
to be exact, till the bell rings, and we'll go. So just to kind of set up what's happening, Jonah has been called, God has called Jonah to go to Nineveh, a very evil city that, you know, does very evil things. And so Jonah's scared to go there, so he goes the other way, gets on a ship, big storm comes up, the sailors, they're sort of superstitious. They cast lots to see whose fault it is.
Yeah.
It falls on Jonah. They're like, well, what should we do? And he said, throw me overboard. And they didn't want to do that because they didn't want the guilt of killing an innocent person.
Well, in the midst of that conversation, too, isn't there this kind of reveal that Jonah says, well, I've kind of gone against what my God has asked me to do.
Right.
And so this storm is happening because
of me. They still didn't want to throw him overboard, though. It said they kept rowing, trying to get back to land. It wasn't working. They finally were like, forgive us, but we're going to do it. They threw him overboard. Storm subsides. They praise God. And, of course, the most famous thing in this story is that Jonah gets swallowed by this huge fish, offers praise to God, and then gets thrown up onto the shore.
Yes.
Spewed Jonah out upon the dry land.
Love it.
So that brings us to chapter 3, where I'm going to start. Then we'll start the timer. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, get up, go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it the message that I tell you. So Jonah set out and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly large city, a 3 days' walk across. Jonah began to go to the city, going a day's walk, and he cried out, 40 days more, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast, and everyone, great and small, put on sackcloth. When the news reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. Then he had a proclamation made in Nineveh. By the decree of the king and his nobles, no human being or animal, herd or flock shall taste anything. They shall not feed, nor shall they drink water. Human beings and animals shall be covered with sackcloth, and they shall cry mightily to God. All shall turn from their evil ways and from the violence that is in their hands. Who knows? God may relent and change his mind. He may turn from his fierce anger so that we do not perish. When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil ways, God changed his mind about the calamity, about the calamity that he said he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. And we'll read one verse of chapter 4. But this was very displeasing to Jonah, and he became angry, which we can talk about a little bit later. So I'm going to start our timer. What do you think about this, Rev Plunkett?
My first thought about reading chapter 3 is, how long would it take for me to walk across all of Fort Worth? Like, is Fort Worth a big enough city that it would take me 3 days to walk across it? Because when you think about Nineveh, my
How
instinct...
fast do you walk?
How fast? I am a slow walker. Skylar will attest to that. She is a foot shorter than me, and she's always like, come on, you gotta keep up. So I do walk slow. I think it would take me the full 3 days to get across Fort Worth. But I think when we start to talk about Nineveh, the size of Nineveh matters because of how many people are involved in this turning back to God moment that their king kind of decrees that they must do. This is a huge win for God in reality, at least in my reading of this. God has got this plan to smite this city and says, sends a messenger, please, got to be reconciled, do these things, and they do. And so God says, okay, we're not going to have the punishment that was planned and intended for you.
There's been a theme throughout all the stories that the narrative lectionary has given us this fall of God changing God's mind. And I'm interested in what you think about that. Some people find that very unsettling.
I don't.
No?
What would the world be like if human beings never changed their mind about anything? If we never came to a conclusion that was different from the thing that we were originally coming to, so
yeah, I understand that, but if God is our rock, I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit. If God's our rock, our solid foundation upon whom we can always, trust, is there a crack in that foundation if God can change God's mind? I'm just curious why people might find that idea unsettling.
Of course, I think it can be unsettling insofar as anything that we already have a hard time putting our finger on. Who God is and what God is up to can, I think, fall in that category. When that thing starts to shift and it becomes even more difficult maybe to put our finger on, that can cause us some concern and some consternation. But I wonder if there's also a trend in the way in which God changes God's mind. Because it seems to me in this scripture and in other ways that I've also seen God change God's mind in the Old Testament, if that isn't always kind of a turn to grace, if it's not always kind of a turn towards second chance and new life and new opportunity. And I think there's a lot of hope in that. And knowing that if the city of Nineveh can be redeemed when it is at its lowest of lows and God is as frustrated as God can be, what does that mean for us? When we are at our lowest of low, there is still hope for redemption, and there is still hope of a relationship with God beyond those moments.
Right. Well, because somebody told me one time, this idea that God knows everything, and therefore God knows what I'm going to choose to do. And somebody said, but God's all-knowing is that God knows every outcome of if you choose any of these things. Yeah. God can see how all of that would play out, but it's ultimately up to you which one of those that you choose. And so maybe God was a little surprised that there's a chance that they might, probably not based on history, but on their history, but maybe there's a chance. Or did God know that Nineveh was going to change their mind, and this was a lesson for Jonah?
That's a good point. I wonder how often our expectations of God aren't met and how we respond to those unmet expectations. Jonah, I think...
Say that again.
Jonah has an expectation of what God is going to do here. Don't you think?
I think there's a little pleasure in it.
I don't think it's a little. I think there's significant hope in Jonah's eyes that Nineveh will no longer exist.
Well, especially since he's obviously feels like he's putting himself at risk to deliver this message from God. Here. So I don't want to go to this evil place because they will probably kill me. But now that I have to go, God's serious about sending me. I hope they get what's coming to them.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought there momentarily, but no, it's totally fine. But I do think that the reader of this text can go a couple of different ways. We can talk about the redemption of Nineveh and how great of a story that is and how graceful and good God is, and I think that's valid and fair and good. I do love this question, though, that you ask of, is God really trying to teach Jonah something here about reconciliation and about how vast God's ability is to reconcile and extend grace, and just who does God's love actually reach?
Right.
Because I think for me, I kind of fall into the trap all the time of putting people into buckets of like, okay, well, this person is just awful and horrible, and there is no redemption for this group of people over here, or there's definitely tons of redemption for this group of people over here who maybe think like me and act like
we have a lot in
me
common.
and do some of those things, right? But this is God saying, this group of people who you maybe vehemently oppose, who you hate, who you maybe want to see just gone, God's redemptive love reaches them as well. And Jonah's reaction maybe isn't far off from ours. So, well, what the heck?
Right. Well, look at all the amazing things that Jonah experiences in the short book that is this story. God calls Jonah to a task. God causes a storm when Jonah disobeys. God saves Jonah by having him swallowed by a big fish, gives him another chance to follow this call, saves the people. So then, but let's look at what happens after.
I would love to. This is my favorite part of
It
Jonah.
is so good. And so he pouts and says, you didn't kill him like you said that you were going to do. And he goes out and he makes a little booth, it says, for himself, and he sits there just waiting to see what would happen, and nothing happened. And so God lets a bush come up to give him some shade, and he's happy about that. And then says God appointed a worm that attacked the bush, and then a wind came and the sun beat down, and he's upset. He says, it's better for me to die than live. I'm going to read this. God said, is it right for you to be angry about the bush? And he said, yes, angry enough to die. And the Lord said, you're concerned about the bush, which you did not labor and did not grow. It came into being in a night and it perished in a night. Shouldn't I be concerned about Nineveh, a great city where there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals? And that's the end.
Yep.
It ends with a question.
It's like the season finale and then the show got canceled.
Yeah, it fades black.
Right.
And I love that. It's like, Jonah, get the point. Look at the thing that you are choosing to be upset about.
Yeah.
Look at the way that you are reacting to people being saved from a horrible fate.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I feel so much like Jonah at times, because I get caught up in those things that are so completely beyond my control of whether or not they ever enter or exit my life. I have nothing to do with the bushes that provide me shade or the bushes that wither away and die that are eaten by worms. And I think God is really, really exercising a ton of patience here to say, hello, Jonah.
Hi, Jonah.
Hi, Jonah. I gave you 2 chances to talk to the folks in Nineveh. The first time you ran away, so I put you in a fish for a minute, had them throw you up onto the beach, and then gave you a second chance, and you're still grumpy and grumbling. So here, I'm going to ask you a question. Why do you care so much about something that you cannot control, and seem to care so little about my redemptive love that is being extended to people that I created? Things that I created and brought into this world, and then said, no, I'm not going to take them out of this world. I'm going to redeem them. You care less about the things that I have put and created on this place than you do about things that you had nothing to do with.
Which makes Jesus very different from Jonah.
Oh, yes.
Because Jesus also proclaimed God's redemptive message, but Jesus wanted it for
everyone.
People.
Yeah.
And
Jonah wanted it for one person in particular.
Right. I don't know that Jonah wanted anything for anybody but himself.
It's true. Hey.
Oh. So it does make me wonder, though, why this story, that's like Noah's Ark, why this story is so popular for children, nursery,
It's got a big fish.
They never show the vomit.
No, they don't. They never show the vomit, just generally.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we, always like to circle back around to how this impacts our Christian faith. We barely did it there at the end.
We're scraping it.
but we did it.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for being on the program.
It is always
today.
a pleasure.
And hope that you will look for ways that God is calling you to do something different and maybe be a little more accepting of people who may not be along the same ideas. I don't know what I'm saying.
How
I'm just
can we?
rambling now.
How can we also extend God's redemptive love and grace
That was what I was trying
to
to
the people
say.
of Nineveh, whoever that might be? For you.
Whoever it might be. Love a Ninavite. Have a great week.